Hello, everyone. Welcome again. I'm very delighted to have all of you join us and very honored to be presenting this talk. I'm Hitesh Hathi. I'm the head of the Mittal Institute, and you're here with us today, as you know, for this webinar, Development While Decarbonizing India's Path to Net Zero. Welcome to all of you. I know people from all over the world are joining us. It's wonderful to have you. The Mittal Institute, which is hosting this event, is an institute that is very focused on issues of climate change, especially in South Asia. A couple of years ago, we launched our platform in New Delhi and are now doing research on a variety of issues having to do with climate and adaptation across South Asia, especially at the moment focused on a series of studies in Western India. The Mittal Institute was founded in 2013 from an initiative that our guest today, Vikram Gandhi, helped set up actually at Harvard. And its mission is to connect Harvard University to India and the greater region of South Asia. We have focused on a series of major studies, but climate change remains our current focus today. And it's part of this climate change journey that we are taking together with colleagues in the region. We are presenting Vikram Gandhi today. I'll introduce Vikram in a moment. I just want to say that Vikram is thinking about how development and decarbonization intersect in practice. So how do we align national climate goals with local development needs? How we coordinate across institutions, the innovations needed, the engagement needed. So it'll be cross-sector insights and field experiences, which very much fits Vikram's past. And the goal is to explore how India, along with other emerging economies, can pursue transitions that are both equitable and workable. So let me introduce Vikram, whom you see before you. Vikram is an old friend. He is a professor at Harvard Business School. His teaching and research focus on sustainable finance and leadership and development in emerging economies. Before joining the faculty at HBS, Vikram spent more than 20 years in investment banking at Morgan Stanley and Credit Suisse. Outside of the Harvard Business School, Vikram is very active in the investment space. He focuses on market-based solutions that work on social impact and sustainability. He's a graduate of Harvard Business School himself, with a long career in a variety of fields, but really his focus has been on how economics, wealth creation can serve larger social goals. And that is what he focuses on teaching. So without further ado, Vikram. Uh,
Thank you, Hitesh. Thank you for that warm welcome, and a big thanks to you and the Mittal South Asia Institute for giving me this opportunity to speak with you. And as Hitesh says, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's an absolute pleasure for me to have this opportunity to share some of my thoughts. And as the screen says, this title, Development While Decarbonizing India's Path to Net Zero, is actually a course. It's a course which I developed 3 years ago, which is taught in the MBA program at Harvard Business School. It's an elective course, it's an immersive course where we do classes in Boston. We just had a couple of classes last week, and we'll go over the course of the semester. But then the MBA students who have taken this course actually come to India and spend 10 days in India in January, 5 days in Bangalore and 5 days in Mumbai, really exploring how, as Hitesh rightfully pointed out, like how do you meet both global and national climate goals in the context of a country that is on such a high trajectory growth path and whose focus is getting people out of poverty and increasing the standards of living people who are not in poverty just across the income curve. And so how do you balance development decarbonizing is really the name of the course itself. And just to give you a minute as to why this course actually came about, I've been, as Hitesh said, quite focused on the area of sustainability, more from an investing lens, a finance lens, since that's my professional background. But what I also felt that, and quite involved with a lot of some of the climate initiatives across Harvard University and some other institutions, but what I found is that a majority of the discussion that happens around climate, and obviously not in the Middle South Asia Institute because of its focus area, but just broadly speaking, is focused on OECD issues. How do we mitigate? We've plateaued out, our growth is limited, emissions are high, emissions per capita are high. And so the whole focus has been on, well, what do we need to do to mitigate, reduce carbon in the air in the context of low growth, big but low growth economies. And that the whole kind of narrative about the fact that a significant, in fact, more than half the world is still growing dramatically. The things that it needs to grow are all generally, high polluting industries like power and steel and cement. The need for food is growing, and food is actually a pretty large emitter from a CO2, methane, and other gas perspective. And so, how do you, both from a policy standpoint, businessman standpoint, balance these two goals? But equally importantly, and since it's a business school lens, that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. It's a transition, it's not a conversion. And therefore, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to actually, from an investment perspective, a business perspective, where you are going to rewire the entire world, has to create some fabulous opportunities from a business standpoint. And even if you are an incumbent, there are many opportunities to convert. And then there's the whole area of startup land. So what I wanted to do, just cover in the next 20, 25 minutes, is just to give you, for those who may not be familiar, some of you may, just to give you a little context of what's going on around emissions and climate in the world. How does that relate to India in terms of its growth and development agenda? And then do a little bit of a deep dive. As I teach at a Harvard Business School, it's all about case studies. So I've written a case study on Tata Power, I've written a case study on JSW Steel. As part of our visit to in January, part of my course, we visit a whole host of startups which are very focused on clean tech. So I'll give you some examples of that. Just to give you an idea that yes, there are huge risks, there are huge problems, but there are also huge opportunities. So next, and Yuvika here is going to help me with the slides a little bit. So next. So just in terms of again, first few slides on setting the backdrop here. So if you look at greenhouse gas emissions, and this is over the last 100 years, there are 4 lines here. One line represents China, second Europe, third United States, and the fourth India. And if you go back to the early 90s, and this is when industrialization was happening in the US, this is exactly what's happening today in a way, in a different context, was happening then. It was moving from horse carriages and manual transport and manual production to industrialized production, to ICE cars, to everything that, and Standard Oil was a big thing, and oil discovery was massive. And so even in the 1920s, the actual greenhouse gas emissions in the industrialized countries was obviously much higher than India and China, which were way behind on the development side. And as you see the lines go, today, China by far on aggregate is the largest emitter, followed by Europe and US, and now India is the 4th largest country emitting. And you can see the curve. The interesting takeaway from this graph is if you look around 2000, that's when China's development really took off, and you can just see how the aggregate emissions have gone. India's kind of at a flatter stage right now, which is where China was around between 1980 and 1990. So it won't be that unexpected, unusual for India to start having this massive trajectory upwards like China did. The good news is that the largest aggregate emitters of the past, which is Europe and the US, if you can see, those lines on aggregate are coming down. So it's a good thing that despite all the noise and rhetoric, the actual aggregate emissions in Europe and the US, which have historically been, if you look at the 1980 time period, have been extremely high on aggregate basis, are coming down. Obviously, per the Paris Agreement, where targets were set, they're not coming down as fast as they should, which is why there's a lot of debate and discussion about it as to whether there should be more incentives and taxes and other things. But on aggregate, they are coming down, which is great. But if you flip this to, say, on a per capita basis, what does this mean? Which is the next slide. On a per capita basis, India, it's just the math. If you have 1.4 billion people, as a population, the United States is 5x plus in terms of per capita emissions. So again, as you see, the good thing is that both the purple line, which is the United States, as well as Europe, which is the second line there, are actually coming down even on a per capita basis, which is very encouraging. Probably not enough, but very encouraging. But on an aggregate, on a per capita basis, the world and China and India are far below the US. And India, focusing on that, is way below. And so you have this issue where, yes, India may be the fourth largest emitting country in the world, but it's just surely the size of the country and the size of the population. But on a per capita basis, it is still extremely low. And we'll get into that in a bit, I'm sure, in the question answers about the whole issue of global south and North created this issue, and now why should the south suffer? And I'll get into that in a bit. Next slide. And so let's just then go into India. So that's the macro picture. India, fourth largest emitter on aggregate, very low emitter on a per capita basis. But if you look at the growth story of India, today it is the fourth largest economy. And very shortly, in the next 2-3 years, it is expected to become the third largest economy. Now, if you look at the size of the economies, the US and China are way out there. So when we talk about third, fourth, fifth, it's between India, Japan, Germany. And so India is expected to be third, but obviously significantly still smaller than US and Europe. A really interesting statistic is that given where India is on its development path, which is the second blue bar there, that almost 90% of the country is not built. Well, you look at urbanization, infrastructure, real estate. I mean, if you just add it up, these are various studies. I've seen a range of 75 to 90%. But just think about it, that this percentage of this country has still not been built. Especially when you visit India, just think about you already have so much there that 75% of this is not to 90% has not been built. The power demand, just as one example, and you can look at any industry itself, the power demand of India is expected to quadruple. So it quadrupled over 20 years from 2000 to 2021. And for the next 20 years, it's expected to quadruple again. Just again, given the demand and the growth and the aspirations of the population. And as a result, which is the last bar there, the demand for energy, housing, transport, you name it. There's nothing in India where the demand is going down. It's just going up. Just given, again, the absolute numbers of the people. But equally, I think one important stat is that India's GDP per capita is about $2,200, $2,300 per capita. It's reached that point, and you look at the analysis of the Asian tigers, Japan, even if you go historically back to the US, you look at China, that's kind of an inflection point when once you reach that point, the actual demand curve and the aspiration to increase per income capita, like in the US, that same number is 70,000 plus. So when you look at the aspirations to increase, there's a huge hockey stick. And India is actually at that stage. So 10 years ago, I mean, you could have the same issue that India's growth story, a lot of people, et cetera. But that was at lower income levels. And so therefore getting out of that cycle was difficult. But now at 2,300, there's enough historical evidence which suggests that the per capita income will go a hockey stick style. That's what's happened in multiple countries that have been studied. And as a result, which is the next page, if you have that kind of growth, if you move to the next page, please. If you have that kind of growth, so on the left side is just showing India's large and growing population getting wealthier. So just to spend a second on this, if you just look at the orange line, which is fiscal 31 compared to the blue line, which is now, and you just look how the blue line and the orange line, as you move in time, which is from left to right, are growing dramatically. And so essentially, that as a result of this, you have a case where as time goes by, this population is getting more affluent and the demand levels will go up. And as a result, if you look at the right, I've just listed here 5 industries. These 5 industries by far the largest polluting industries in the world: power, steel, cement, which are hard to abate sectors, mobility, automotive, and food. And if you look at the multiplier in the next 25 years, or beyond, so 25 years is going to quadruple, which is the power which I just mentioned. And if you go back and think to 2070, which is where India said its net zero targets, power and steel is 8x. I mean, the basic takeaway being that demand for everything that pollutes are high polluting industries, the demand in India is going to go up dramatically because the aspirations are going up and it's part of the development agenda. So that is the conundrum on one hand and a massive opportunity on the other. Next slide. So this gives you just what I was saying to reiterate as to where are the emissions in India actually coming from. About a third come from power, another 25% from agriculture, and the two biggest, for those who may not be familiar, the two biggest sources of pollution in the agricultural sector are dairy, which obviously, as you know, in India is a huge thing and only growing. Again, the access to good dairy products, the protein embedded in dairy. Generally, high protein products are, as your income level goes up, high protein demand goes up. The other big polluter is rice. It's by far, it emits methane and consumes enormous amounts of water. And so actually, if you break up the agriculture, I mean, there's lots of sources, but the two biggest ones by far are dairy and rice, paddy. Manufacturing, the two biggest ones are steels and cement. You need that for everything, for infrastructure, for building, for real estate, for washing machines, for cars. Basically, you need it for everything, and transportation. So if you just focus on those four, the demand, as I said in the previous page, are going to go up dramatically. And so, that's just again to give you a little backdrop as to where we are in India. Next. So if you think about the projections of India, so today, as I mentioned in the second slide or the first slide, India is the third largest aggregate. In that side, it was fours because Europe was taken as one entity. But if you just look at it by country, India is the third largest aggregate emitter. Depending on the estimate you look at, it's like 3 to 4 gigatons. Obviously, far below on a per capita basis. And if you carried on as business as usual, BAU, there would be steep rises in aggregate and per capita emissions. So for example, on the right side, the red line is business as usual, that 3 to 4 million gigatons by 2035, just a decade from now, would go to 5.7. And by 50, which is 25 years, it goes to 7.4. That kind of aggregate level is just, that will actually have seriously negative impacts, and I will talk about that. If India, kind of, as we promised, like we've got sort of these short-year plans, and if you promise, it'll still go up, right, on aggregate. And I think one of the things, and I'll talk about this a little bit, there are two kind of metrics when you evaluate climate emitting. And I'm not talking about adaptation where you have existing issues and you adapt, which I will also mention. But when you look at the metrics which you evaluate climate on, one is emission intensity. So for every a unit of power that you generate, what is the CO2 emission? Or for example, every steel ton that you produce, what is the CO2 produced per ton? India is very focused, and a lot of the policies are probably, in my view, not enough, but a lot of focus is on the intensity. Like, let's drive down the intensity of our production so that, as we grow, it's in a lower intense environment. But if your demand is going to double, or quadruple in the next quarter and double in the next, in the next 5 years, your intensity may go down, but your aggregate is only going up. So even in this case, the blue line, you actually have a pretty focused agenda on reducing intensity per unit of production, but the actual aggregate is going from 3 to 4 gigatons to 5. And to achieve our goals of 2070 of zero, they actually need to go down to 2.3, 2.1. So the key takeaway here is that a lot is actually being done. I'll get into the policy initiatives. But when you have to balance the growth agenda, you have to balance the fact that you're a democracy and, on average, a person in India doesn't really appreciate climate as a thing as much as they should, that it actually becomes very hard in the context of democracy to actually balance those two issues. Next paragraph. Next slide, please. So then one question always comes that, the West created all these problems. I mean, if you look at the first one of the charts that I showed you, they industrialized on the base of basically putting carbon in everything that exists out here, and it was great. I mean, it's really at that time. I mean, I talked to quite a few CEOs in the oil and gas industry and other places. I mean, they were the heroes of the 70s and 80s. they propelled income levels going up. They propelled the development of the West. They even propelled the development of developing countries, right? Like oil in India being imported and things like that. They were the heroes. Now they're kind of so-called vilified that they're actually destroying the world. But so it's, so the debate becomes, well, the West created all the North, the so-called global North created all these issues. They should be funding all this, and how can you ask us to stop our development in the context of climate? And while there's a lot of truth to that, and there should be, and these COP, this COP, the Conference of Parties, where people meet to talk about climate. The next COP is actually starting this week in Belém, in Brazil. The last one was in the Middle East. And so they basically, you have these discussions of money transferring. But I think what's important to recognize from an India standpoint is that the actual vulnerability that India has on climate is significantly higher than countries in the West, and its ability to cope with it, both for financial and infrastructure reasons, is very difficult. So I'm just highlighting here that while you can blame the North and kind of ask for money and do this and that, the actual actions need to be taken, because if you don't, the negative implications in India as a country are enormous. So 80% of population lives in climate risk districts. 13, I think that number actually is going up. 13 of the world's 20 most polluted cities are in India. This last summer, there have been extreme heat areas of 50 to 55 degrees where people had to change their work hours, they had to move. So there's a huge issue of just workflow and migration. The concentration of, given the large coastline in India, I grew up in Mumbai, I can see it over there as well. The risks, floods and cyclones cyclones on the one hand, and then droughts on the other. The risks have only gone up, the intensity has gone up. Cyclones, which used to just hit on the east coast, are now hitting on the west coast. The intensity of the rain is going up. A lot of the big cities like Mumbai, and they're right there on the top 5 to 10 list of vulnerable cities in the world. A lot of them are at or below the coastline. Nearly 40% of India lives in slums, which is on the coast and at the coastline. And so if you have intense rainfall, slightly rising sea levels, and like some sort of a storm hit at the same time, the population is significantly vulnerable to climate change. And then the question is, well, how do you fix it? And if you look at the numbers that we thrown around, I'll get into that in a second too, they're enormous. I mean, there's like $2.5 trillion to actually build this infrastructure. So the problem, the implications of India are massive. And so this, if you put yourself in the shoes of the government, you have so many priorities. You got to get people out of poverty. You got to provide healthcare, education. There's obviously the whole area of defense, given everything around that's going on in India. And then how do you sit and prioritize climate change in that context when you know that these are going to be implications if you actually don't do something about it? Next slide. So this is really a collective action problem, right? I mean, I'm sure some of you may have heard the tragedy of the commons, which is that kind of everybody kind of does their thing without worrying the implications of the broader issue. For example, you can pollute away and it doesn't necessarily impact you as a company or as an entity or as an operation or as an individual. You can pollute away because there's no cost to it. There's no cost to what they call the externality. But at some point, the oxygen goes away and no one can breathe. So that's called the tragedy of the commons. The problem, so that's one classic economic theory issue, and I think climate falls right squarely into that. The even more complicated issue with climate is the tragedy of the horizons, is that this is a slow burn, if you will, and I'm sorry to use that term, but this is a slow problem in the sense that, the implications are not overnight. I mean, think of COVID as an example. It was obviously a terrible, terrible couple of years, but, the tragedy was that you could see people dying from it right there in front of you. It was in the news of people dying from this disease. And while it may not have been done perfectly, the world got together, business got together with government, and created a vaccine and started trying to solve the issue, because it was an issue which was hitting you in the face and you could see people dying in front of you. And it was directly related to a disease or to a pandemic. And they were actually able to deal with it in 2-3 years. The issue with climate, it's a slow burn. It's like it goes over a period of time. And so you're not, while you may see wildfires and cyclones, you just had a huge hurricane go through Jamaica and the devastation that it's caused in that country. But you've had these 5, 10 years ago. The intensity has definitely, obviously increased. But what I mean by the tragedy of horizons is that, I'm in my 60s. It'll impact me, obviously, but not that, it's not going to be the end of, for me that much. I think for the next generation, it'll be huge. But the generation after that, if we carry on like this place is not livable, the earth. And so therefore adaptation becomes a real issue where you need to change how people live and work and think about things. So the tragedy of horizons is a collective action problem, and it's got two kind of issues of the commons and the horizons. Next. So now let me talk about a little bit. So that's the setting of the stage as to what the issues are. And so collective action actually needs urgent, collective action problem needs urgent collective action. And the question really is what the degree of urgency is, because we'll see what happens at this COP in Brazil. But it's where policy and regulation, technology and innovation, and that's where the massive business opportunity is, both at the big company level, at small company level, at the government level. How are is investors thinking of it? And India is like nearly 20% of the world's population, 7% of the world's GDP, but only 4% of the world's clean spend. India's currently, if you look at just like the US, on aggregate basis, US and Europe emissions have peaked. They've started coming down. India's peak is somewhere in the is like, I would say in this range, 28 to 40, given where we are. It's probably more like 35 to 40. You have to look at customers. Our customers, really, while they talk a lot about climate, are they willing to pay a premium for it right now, given the technology makes, cleaner everything a little more expensive? How are employees thinking about it? I know the younger folks in my class are very focused on this topic, but and then just generally the civil society and community. I've highlighted, ultimately a lot of this needs both will and intent and collective action, but it also needs money. And so if you look at the chart on the right, the yellow, and I've circled the red over there for India, and you just look at how much China spends on clean climate finance, more than the rest of the world combined. While people may vilify China for this, just as an aside issue, China puts on more renewable capacity per year, new incremental renewable capacity per year than the rest of the world combined. But if you look at where India is on the yellow side, where it is and where it needs to be. So if you have a 20 NZE is your net zero targets, if you will, net zero emissions, that if you wanted to get to where all you got to get to, you essentially right now, the yellow bar is where you're spending. You need to spend at least twice more of where you are today to actually hit anywhere close to what your 2030 net zero targets are. Next. And so I would say that I don't sound too negative here. There needs to be done, but a lot of very interesting things have been done. There's obviously been at COP26, which is in Glasgow, which is the Conference of Parties, which is being held in Brazil this week, and next week was in Scotland, and the Prime Minister had made this announcement. 50% of India's installed electric capacity is from non-fossil fuels. And just for your knowledge, installed and generating are two different things, because installed capacity in the thermal context or fossil fuel context can go 24/7. Installed capacity in renewables right now cannot go 24/7, right? When the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, there's no energy. And I will get into this, that's where a huge technology, innovation, and money is being spent, even in India, on storage. Because if you can actually store the excess energy that's created during the day when the sun is bright, and obviously India has tons of sun, solar by far, as far as renewable goes, will be the biggest one in India, and followed by wind, and maybe nuclear and things over time. But, when it doesn't, in the night, if you can't store that excess energy where it's 24/7, you need base load factor, which is where fossil fuel comes in. That's why even a place like China, which is, generating massive amounts of renewables, is still also opening, fossil fuel-based plants, because they need 24/7, as is India, by the way. But they're set very good targets. I mean, reduce emissions by 45%. Are they on track for that? Probably not. Need to do a little bit more. Reduce the emissions by 1 billion gigatons from 3 to 4. But as you saw on the current path, even if they do what they're doing, it'll still get to 5. Nuclear, I think, what was very positive in the recent budget, of India, where they actually talked about the private sector getting into nuclear. I think just for the world in general, nuclear done correctly is a massive opportunity. There's enormous amounts of capital going into nuclear right now. And the other counterbalancing factor for all this, which I haven't talked about here because it's less of an issue in India, but globally, the energy demand for artificial intelligence is actually shooting through the roof, which has brought natural gas and other fossil fuel-based kind of data centers into play. And so there now suddenly over the last 12 to 18 months, while we were talking about climate change and emissions, there's now this new whole area of how the world is going to get rewired, which is solely based on more energy. So that I hope will be actually an incentive for massive amounts of investments in clean forms of energy rather than going back to fossil fuels. Green hydrogen is the other one, and with some of the large companies and big conglomerates in India, really trying to drive the cost of green hydrogen down. Right now, green hydrogen, is at about $4 to $5 a kilo for it to actually be competitive with fossil fuels for steel making and for other things. It needs to be at nearly 1.5. So there are interim targets. Next. I'm going to go a little faster here because of time, so I want to keep questions. But there are enormous amounts of challenges, right? I mean, India's renewable capacity addition is only 6% of China. I think the biggest one I take away on this page really is the integration of renewables. Because if you don't have storage, proper transmission, and reform of the transmission and distribution system, you will not, get to where you need to get to in terms of net zero. I think nuclear is being discussed, but it's a long time horizon. And there are various other kind of initiatives in electric vehicles and agriculture, which are kind of in place and which are being pushed right now. Next. The policy levers, India has kind of created a lot of incentives around the PLI scheme, the production linked incentive scheme, to create more be less. China dominates the supply chain in renewables, and so to be less dependent on China by doing more manufacturing. The Tatas that all have opened a really state-of-the-art solar panel manufacturing facility, but still the actual cells, the input and the raw material that goes into the cells are all still coming from China. So, just like they have done in the past with renewables, where they mandate a certain percentage of renewables, of energy that goes into the grid to be renewables, that may increase. They're providing a lot of incentives in the agricultural sector to reduce emissions, as well as, as they have in other areas like microfinance and other development areas, getting the state banks to provide priority sector lending, which qualifies the banks to do lending at a cheaper rate than market rates. Next. Hard to abate sector, there's, for steel, for example, to reduce its emission levels, you've got to use more scrap, but it doesn't have enough scrap because the steel industry hasn't been there long enough, and to generate scrap from original steel takes about 25 to 30 years. A lot of experimentation on new technologies like carbon capture. I'll get into an example of transport where there have been subsidies on electric vehicles, which are actually kicking in, and some really successful startups, particularly on the two-wheeler side. And then India generally, from a policy standpoint, is trying to develop a carbon market, but I think it's a little ways to go. But there are a lot of mechanisms and policy levers, and I spent quite a bit of time at Niti Aayog and a few of the other policymakers in Delhi. And I think that this is high on their priority list, to try to figure out how to balance. Like, for example, if they put like a $25 tax on coal, right? I mean, it's in a case I wrote on JSW Steel. The JSW Steel chairman and in that case has quoted that if the Indian government put $25 a ton on coal, if you use coal, you got to pay $25 a ton. The actual fuel source for so many industries would dramatically change. But the problem that there are so many livelihoods that are based on the coal industry. And they are in parts of the country which are the less affluent parts of the country, like in the north, in the Bihar and that area. And so the railroad, the Indian railroad, transporting coal is a huge part of their revenue base. So it's like, how do you actually balance that thing of that, just put a tax on it and you'll get the change? And what do you do with all the folks that get impacted negatively because no one's using coal? So I think, again, it's the issue of transition rather than conversion. Next. If I look at, some of, most importantly, I think, the biggest opportunity here is technology. I mean, I think all the world's problems typically ultimately boil down to like, can we get up new technology which is efficient, which has the guardrails that it's not misused, and which can be done at scale, right? And which can disrupt existing methodologies. So if you look at all the technologies, and I think this is where the opportunity is for all of those who are listening. And I wanted to, there's a negative picture I painted as to where we're going, but there is huge opportunity, whether it be renewables, storage, transportation, biofuels, the whole list, hydrogen, carbon capture, circularity, waste to energy. And there are certain areas where in India today, it's highly commercially viable. So when you look at renewables, I said renewables today, putting on more renewable capacity is less expensive than fossil fuel based capacity, but it's not 24 by 7, which is where battery storage comes in. And it's scaling right now, but it's not there at the scale where you can use it at the grid level on a cost efficient basis. Clearly, biofuels are 2 to 3 wheelers, and there are a bunch of IPOs that have been done of 2 and 3 wheeler companies right now doing extremely well. And then there are newer nascent technologies which are, need policy support like hydrogen, carbon capture, the circular economy, where a lot of the incentives are going. But this basically, if you cut through it all, these are all the technologies, and just not in India, everywhere. And we need to move from the left side of this page to the right side. And the faster we can do that, the better off we are being able to balance this development and decarbonization agenda. Next. Financing the transaction, and then I have a bunch of examples here, but I'll probably stop after this. Financing the transaction, there is a huge gap. I mean, the annual requirement is $170 billion in India, right? And the whole Indian budget, just to put it in context, is 550 billion. So if you're the Indian government and you need 170 billion to spend if you want to reach some sort of a climate goal that you've set, and your whole budget is 550 billion, I mean, it's unrealistic, right? So therefore, there are various financing methods like blended finance, financing sources like green bonds, deposits, public-private partnerships, huge innovation going on. But I think more needs to happen in that space. If you look at some of the numbers in these boxes, they're kind of minuscule towards the relative to the 170 billion that's needed. But it really creates big opportunities. So next page. And a lot of interesting companies are doing a lot of interesting things about it. So Tata Power, I've written a case on Tata Power. They're leading on rooftop solar, which is a big opportunity, has a value chain. I point to the fourth bullet here in key initiatives, smart meters and grid modernization. And this is not just Tata Power doing it. Just think about it. If you have to modernize the entire grid, if you talk to a Tata Power CEO, and I've done a podcast with him very recently, it's an HBS podcast, essentially, basically, it's become a technology play. It's like, it's not a utility anymore. It's a customer-based technology play. Like, how can you, improve your technology right from generation till electricity hits someone's home or a factory or a manufacturing facility? How do you automate and make that more efficient technology-wise? Big opportunity. Next page. Tata JSW Steel. I just taught this case to my HBS class last week, and the JSW Steel team were there. They're driving down their intensity, I talk, big time, right from 2.36 tons CO2 tons, which is on the left side under carbon intensity, down to 1.95. They're targeting even lower, but their demand for steel is doubling, and so their capacity is going to double. But they've started as a large company, really in introducing like the challenges, the technology gaps, the second gap, and hydrogen CCUS, big investments happening there. So I'm quite encouraged. And then one more page, which I'll focus on. And then just flipping aside, I won't want to get into all these, but there is a massive climate tech startup ecosystem going on there. And so whether you look at, these are all Indian companies, all based in India. They may have a connection to the West because the customer may be there, or they may be going back and forth. But like Aether, which is on the second row under transport, I take my students there. It's a 2-wheeler company, started from scratch 10 years ago, did an IPO last year, $3 billion market cap. They've got the second largest now in India. String Bio, which is on the third line. I take my students there. They take methane from rice, from landfills, and convert that methane through a fermentation process to food for for animals as well as for humans. And then there's a whole, if you look at all the different areas here, so this is a massive opportunity as well. And a lot of the large companies like Tata Power or JSW are working with these startups because these startups can use their technology at these big companies to scale. So I have a few more slides, but I'm going to stop here. I'm very cognizant of the time. But the bottom line, I think the key takeaway is that balancing this whole issue of development and decarbonizing is a massive challenge. I think India's development needs to continue to happen, but how can it happen in a low emitting environment? It'll happen, and it's a transition. And I'm quite hopeful that both the understanding of the government and the policy initiatives, the technology developments and the investments that are happening there, will probably get us to on the right trajectory and the right path. So let me stop there and take questions. You're on mute, Hitesh.
Yes, hi, Vikram. Thank you. We do have a bunch of questions, but I was just going to take a moment and maybe ask one of my own. And for those of you who joined a little bit later, we are hearing from Vikram Gandhi, who teaches at Harvard Business School. He's a business school grad who has a long career in investment before. And as you just heard, he teaches both an immersive course from which, we're hearing the immersive course is in fact development while decarbonizing India's path to net zero, which is about climate-related opportunities. Vikram also teaches a course in the MBA program, Leadership and Corporate Accountability. So Vikram, I mentioned those because I was thinking as you were talking, this challenge is very sobering, but you're also presenting it as a massive opportunity. In the very beginning, you said 90% of what India needs, it has yet to build. Maybe give or take, there's a series of estimates that you can say. One of the things I was thinking about to try to connect the different things you've talked about is India has a very low level of R&D investment,
Yeah.
right? Research and development, really some kind of innovation breakthroughs are also important in this sphere. And how do we achieve that? India is 0.6 or 0.7% of GDP. China is above 3%. Countries that make it from a middle income level like India to a higher income level generally are 3 to some even above 4% GDP, if I'm remembering correctly. So how do we address that?
So I think that's absolutely correct. So India is just not known for deep technology, right? I mean, all these startups that I actually mentioned are what I would call, taking some basic technologies and making products and services for the Indian market predominantly. But like Aether is an example, right? I mean, they're still importing their batteries from China. A lot of the finished product, a lot of the inputs which come from different parts of the world, what they're doing is we have the charging infrastructure. Some of that is built in India, but otherwise it's coming from outside. But they've been successful in selling two-wheelers, but the technology part of it is coming from China and other parts of the world. So I think it's a huge challenge. I mean, I'm not sure how you get from 0.6 to 3. I mean, I think on the one hand, it's a policy, shift that the government needs to make, that if you are, and we're seeing this a little bit now, right? I mean, basically the US and China, battling it out over as to who's superior in technology, et cetera, and India is just not part of the dialogue. I mean, just to put it
Yeah.
frankly. And so
Yeah.
I think again, and then to get your R&D cranked up is not like going to happen overnight. It takes a 10, 20-year time horizon to think about it at the policy level. What I will say is at the company level, I think a lot of large companies and the whole venture capital industry, but more importantly, the company level, are starting to think long-term, doing not deep technology, but taking some technologies and really going deeper into it and scaling it up within their own op. So for example, if I take JSW Steel, they've actually built a pilot green hydrogen steel plant, right? Where they're using, again, there's some technology which is taken from other parts of the world, but taking that technology, developing it further and trying to scale it up in the Indian context. They're doing a test on one of the largest plants in Vijayanagar on carbon capture, right? Which is, again, it's not commercially viable right now because part of it is you capture the carbon, you can use some of that energy back into the steel production, but what the hell do you do with the rest of it? Because there's no infrastructure to actually store the carbon. So therefore, public-private partnerships, I think, in R&D and development are a really important part. Can I be realistic with hand on heart say that India is going to become some big R&D hub going forward in anywhere in the near term? I don't think so. But I think most of the clean tech companies are basically said, look, someone else, we're doing a lot of some basic research, but somebody else may develop basic research. Our job is to take that basic and customize it for the Indian market and do it at scale. I think that's really the model right now.
Very interesting. The other question I had is, so
Yeah,
it's a question that we have a version of from Preeti Shroff Mehta. How can we better educate the younger generation of leaders?
yeah,
Basically, she's talking about how can we effect behavior change that leads to a circular economy, which is critical. And that, you made a couple of points. You talked about the tragedy of the commons.
yeah,
And in India, we are known particularly for living in the tragedy of the commons, right? We throw our garbage out without caring. It's just a very visceral example. So
yeah,
how do we create the education and leadership,
yeah.
that we need?
Yeah, I think it is happening, quite honestly. I mean, again, I really spend more time in Mumbai and analyzing this with the Mumbai Municipal Commissioner. He's actually, while he's doing all his other things that, he's dragged in a million different directions as the BMC commissioner in Mumbai. But I think for him, climate change and Mumbai adapting to climate, there's now a climate action policy in Mumbai. And a core part of that is actually educating not just the younger but the adults too as to, like, climate is a thing. You just don't throw things everywhere, and let's have a whole waste management recycling process there. Even I don't like to use this term, but they use the term called rag pickers, right? I mean, there's a whole industry out there to how to separate, how to and then make sure it doesn't go to landfills. Then large companies, again, getting back into public-private partnership like Unilever, are actually doing a lot in terms of facilitating plastic recycling. So I think it is clearly that's part of at least some of the schools I've seen. It's part of the agenda that this, because that's the generation actually who's in school right now are going to get impacted the most. I mean, it's not you and I, and so. But I think, is it still there? I mean, I know a lot of situations where they've actually, you know, basically done it at home. You've got your separate plastic, paper, or organic waste, and then some person who's collecting it just kind of dumps it all together again. And so it's like, I think that whole educating that entire value chain is happening. It's a slow burn, but I think it is a priority for the government.
So since you mentioned the government, I want to go to a question from Piyush Kumar. What are some of the political economy related challenges in this transition? How do we create a socio-political coalition for green transition? Uh, and how do we involve the middle class in accessing all of this? Um, Maybe that's a connected question.
Yeah, so I'm not going to advocate what the political position of any parties are, but I think at least what I've heard the rhetoric from all the different parties, they were obviously, given that they're looking at facing elections and all that, they'll all say the right things. But in terms of that election thing, but I think they do highlight, and I don't think there's any big disagreement between the parties, at least from whatever I can tell on public discourse. I don't kind of interact with much of them. Is I interact with the Niti Ayogs and the people trying to do it rather than the politicians. I think the rhetoric around climate is not different amongst the parties. They're like, no, I haven't heard any party saying like climate, what rubbish, why are we spending any money on it? I mean, I just haven't heard that. Maybe there is somebody who's saying it, but I haven't heard it. And so I think there's a generally, and people have seen the floods and the heat zones and like, you know, like forget about steel and power. Like if you're living in Delhi, this is where all the politicians live. And from now on, through the middle of December, you have an AQI of whatever, I don't know what it is today, but it's like anywhere from 500 to 1,000. Like you're
Yeah.
seeing it, you're breathing it, you're killing yourself with every breath. And so I think, and then this whole issue of, burning in it's gone on, and they still haven't solved it. So I think there's a clear realization. I just wish there was more political will to actually bite the bullet and like you create incentives and you create sticks. Unfortunately, a lot of what happened in India, it happens in India is on the incentive side, which is good, right? They'll give a little subsidy here, a subsidy there. They're giving the subsidy to farmers to actually, not burn and gulch, but that gulching takes like a month, And so it's just easy to burn, right? I mean, that's basically what they have an incentive there that to actually gulch. But if they put a
Exactly.
tax, it'll act, but then who the hell will they collect the tax from, right? So basically, I think the issue is that a lot of India has focused on the incentive side. I really do think, in some special way, the tax side is also important, and that to actually make it expensive for companies to kind of and individuals to be taxed to cause this externality in some shape or form. I know it's like easy to say and hard to do, but I think incrementally if that thought process is introduced, I think it'll make a big difference.
So, of course, there you encounter the problem that you talked about with coal, balancing good
Yeah,
policy with livelihood.
right.
And we see that in the US, one of the problems is that somehow climate messaging has gone wrong. So it's become political in perhaps the wrong ways for those of us who care about
Yeah,
climate
yeah, correct.
change,
But
where
I will
climate
say,
change has become a bad thing,
absolutely.
talking
So
about it.
it's yeah, no, absolutely, and some really interesting projects like which are 90% complete have been stopped. For these wind, like offshore wind now. But I will say, at least by dialogues with long-term investors like the pension plans, sovereign wealth funds, people who when they think about a quarter, they're not thinking about 90 days, they're thinking about 25 years. I think with a lot of boards, whether it be climate, there's the other, there are a bunch of other issues, which, they basically say, yeah, we need to maybe balance based on what the government's saying. But I think internally they still are very focused on, and they may take away their net zero announcements and all. But I think they're still very much focused on the fact that, 30 years, there's going to be a different world. I mean, even the oil and gas industry kind of acknowledge that. I mean, I mean, they are putting a lot of money into carbon capture, green hydrogen, renewables, storage. There's a lot of capital allocation. Maybe it should be more. But even the core industry that has so-called fueled the world and created this wealth and created our standard of living and done a fantastic job doing it, are also realizing that it's time to change and it's time to change our capital allocation. But it's a transition. So we need to keep on drilling oil and gas. I mean, think about it. Suppose oil and gas, basically tomorrow they said, okay, because of climate, we're going to stop gas production and stop oil production. I mean, the whole world would collapse, including India. And so it's a transition. And the question is how fast that transition needs to happen.
And obviously, it needs to happen faster than in the past.
Yeah,
David Jones, who's a colleague of ours here at Harvard, has been doing
yeah,
research on how London
yeah,
managed its transition away from fuels that were creating this incredible air pollution, which was killing people. But it took a
yeah,
century for the political movement to achieve
yeah.
the current air in London.
I mean, if you
But we
think about it,
obviously,
like this is Delhi, all right? It's been
yeah,
going on for, I
exactly.
think, at least 10 years. This is where
Yeah,
this cabinet
exactly.
lives. This is where all the ministers live. They get out of their
In their
garden. I
cabinet.
mean, one of my friends is telling me he went to the vice president's house for dinner or something last year. They couldn't come out because their eyes would like water and they couldn't breathe. This is the vice president of India's house, right? So it's like they're seeing it.
You can,
It's not like
it's
some
in front of you.
obscure, abstract thing that's happening out there.
So we only have about 5 minutes. I want to get to maybe two questions that are connected.
Yeah,
Rahil Jani is asking, since India is at this very crucial standpoint, do you think we will pay a price by prioritizing decarbonization rather than focusing on development, which is what the global north does? So what is that price? And in a related way, there's an anonymous attendee who's asking, should our focus really be on net positive rather than net zero? So where do we set the goal?
yeah. So I think that kind of gets, I think it's a very important point. I think prioritization probably is not the right word. I mean, that's why I specifically use while development, while decarbonizing. So I think it'll be completely unrealistic to expect that the aggregate emission levels, which have been coming down in the US and Europe, which has only happened in the last 10 years, is going to happen anytime in India. I just think it's what we need to focus on is as growth happens, and if this is the baseline of emission increase, we change that baseline to this and try and flatten that curve. And I think that flattening of that curve happens by a lot of big companies, like the big companies like the Tata Powers, the JSW Steels, and other company. I mean, I just those are the two cases I've written, but I know a lot of the aluminum companies, all these companies that kind of are actually trying to do a lot to bend that curve by reducing the intensity. But obviously, because of the demand, the aggregate is going up, but the curve is. I think a lot of the policy initiatives which the government has put in place, again, it's very incentive oriented rather than tax oriented. That's one. The third is, I think the government needs to think about, from a policy standpoint, like what is the world going to look like, or what is India going to look like 25, 30 years from now? And start the reskilling process ahead of the curve. Like, what are all these people who are in the coal and mining industry going to do? Like, how do we retrain them? I think, if done correctly, reskilling and retraining is a huge opportunity in India if done correctly. I mean, I know a lot of companies have tried it in the past, and we have the National Skill Development Authority, I forget, NSDL. There have been some initiatives, but that needs to be turbocharged. And I think, when people talk about AI taking away jobs and all that, the day-to-day jobs that happen in India, like, the fixing jobs which actually need like manpower are not going away. I mean, they're only going to increase. And so reskilling people and thinking about that reskilling doesn't happen overnight. It's a 10, 15-year process, 20-year process, in terms of whole populations. And that coal is not going to be a thing. I mean, just think about it, just make the headline. Coal is not a thing 20 years, 5 years from now. Okay, but if coal is not a thing 25 years from now, how many people are impacted by coal today? And what do we need to do to get from here to that, to get coal out of the system and make sure that we are not destroying livelihoods in the meantime, but in fact, hopefully coming up with opportunities which increase livelihoods over time.
We have 2 minutes, and I'm just going to ask you to talk
Yeah.
very quickly about this. Is what Ravi Grover and a couple of other people have mentioned it. The US, obviously, this administration has a different point of view. How is
Yeah.
the US a factor in climate thinking, especially in India and policy?
So the US is obviously a big, I mean, they by far are on aggregate the biggest emitter. But, regardless of the rhetoric, so I think it'll slow things down, right? Because the inflation, I mean, if you think about this thing called the Inflation Reduction Act, when it was passed under the Biden administration and it was passed by the Republicans as well, it was called the Inflation Reduction Act because it had nothing to do with inflation reduction. In fact, it was pumping money in the economy and it actually increases inflation. It basically was called that because some of the Republicans did not want, to be viewed as supporting climate change investing. But it's all, I mean, it's like the biggest subsidy and tax. If you add it all up, it's $800 billion. It's the biggest one ever in the history of the US. And so while some of the things have been backrolled by the Trump administration because they don't believe that it's effective, there are quite a few things which are very much still in place. And in fact, a lot of the benefit of that Inflation Reduction Act was gone to the Republican states. I mean, again, Texas, right? It's the home of oil and gas. But actually, if you look at if Texas were a country, it would be the fifth largest generator of power using renewable energy if it were a country. It would be basically China, US, India, Germany, Texas. And it's like, so I think it's slowed down. I think obviously the current administration is not a priority for them, and that's their policy, and so be it. But I think from an Indian standpoint, what they need to think about is that the negative implications of climate are going to be far worse in India than they will be in the US. And the ability for India to actually deal with it because of both the existing infrastructure, so adaptation is a big one, where you take the existing infrastructure and adapt it to climate change, like in Mumbai, for example, is that the money is not there and the infrastructure is not there. So therefore, this is even a bigger problem for India, which you need to kind of bend that curve in terms of emission level, regardless of what the US is doing.
Exactly. So I think we should end there because we are at time. Uh, so Vikram, Gandhi, thank you very much for
No, thank you for
giving
giving me
us,
the opportunity to share my thoughts. I really appreciate it.
well, it's a little bit of a dip into your own course. Right? We
Yes.
have just had a vision of your immersive field course on sustainable investing. Um, Vikram is a Vikram is a professor at Harvard Business School. He's a Harvard Business School graduate. He has been for a long time focused on teaching, thinking, working in the field of sustainable investing. And his course at the business school is Development While Decarbonizing India's Path to Net Zero, which is partly what he has been presenting us with here. Vikram, thank you. I want to thank all of you for joining us from all over the world. I want to thank the Mittal Institute team. This has been a seminar with the Mittal Institute. The Mittal Institute is the Harvard Institute which connects the university to India and South Asia. And I want to especially thank our office in New Delhi for having organized this venture. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, take care.